Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining in the first Pennsylvania Native Species Day. I'm Deb Klenotic, Deputy Communications Director for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Today we'll hear from leaders of 7 state agencies who, along with 14 organizations statewide in agriculture and other industries, environmental advocacy, and academia, make up the Governor's Invasive Species Council. The council wanted to create Pennsylvania Native Species Day to increase awareness of the importance of Pennsylvania's native plants, insects, and animals, and the challenges to their survival from non-native invasive species. We'll hear from Fish and Boat Commission Executive Director Tim Schaefer, Coordinator of the Governor's Invasive Species Council at the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Chris Abel, Department of Environmental Protection Secretary Patrick McDonough, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Assistant State Forest Manager Matt Kieffer, Acting Secretary of Health and Physician General Dr. Denise Johnson, Department of Transportation Acting Executive Deputy Secretary Melissa Batula, and Game Commission Wildlife Habitat Management Director David Gustafson. After we hear from our speakers, folks from Resource Environmental Solutions will tell us a bit about what we see here and why it's important. I'd like to note some other organizations around the state who are also joining in celebrating Pennsylvania Native Species Day. When they heard it was in the works, they let us know what activities they were planning. They are a number of state parks in locations around the state, the Pennsylvania Native Fish Coalition, Harrisburg University of Science and Technology, the Regional Science Consortium and Go Native Erie, Longwood Gardens, the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society, Penn State Master Watershed Stewards in Crawford, Erie, and Warren counties, the Murraysville Garden Club in Westmoreland County, and Penn State Extension groups at the Philadelphia Flower Show today, including Master Watershed Stewards, Master Gardeners, 4-H, and Pennsylvania Sea Grant. A big thank you to all of these organizations for celebrating and supporting Pennsylvania native species. And now we'll begin with Tim Schaefer.
Thanks, Deb. And my eyes aren't as good as hers. I don't know how she did that without sunglasses on, so I'm keeping mine on. So welcome. And where you are here, we're on Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission property that we manage on behalf of the Commonwealth. Really do encourage everybody to stick around afterwards to hear from RES about the restoration project that really started with BJ Small and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation a couple years ago when we did this planting here that's well underway, but then just an unbelievable stream restoration project in partnership with Susquehanna Township, Lower Paxton, to help them meet some MS4 stormwater requirements that has absolutely brought this creek back here to life like never before. My office actually looks out. You can't see it because of all the trees. You can sort of see the peak over there, but looks down into this little gully here. And when it would rain, it would be a chocolate milk log flume, 8-10 feet deep of just ripping. I mean, absolutely ripping. And now when it rains, it's this wonderful meandering clear stream. I mean, it worked literally like overnight. So the vegetation's rolling in. There were about 4,000 native species that were planted as a part of the project. And you'll hear a little bit of that from RES today. So I do want to kick things off by reading the proclamation from the governor. It's right here, but you probably can't read it from that distance. So on behalf of Governor Wolf, today is Native Species Day, June 17th. It's also my wife's birthday, so happy birthday. Whereas Pennsylvania is home to diverse native species of plants, insects, fish, birds, and mammals, which arose hundreds of years ago and thrive in mutual dependence. And whereas our native ecosystem provides natural resources for many Pennsylvania industries, including agricultural food production, recreation, fisheries, and timber. whereas native species provide Pennsylvanians with enjoyable outdoor experiences, and whereas invasive non-native species proliferating in tandem with the expansion of worldwide commerce and travel in the past 100 years progressively threaten the survival of native species, and whereas invasive non-native species cause financial strain on Pennsylvania businesses and government resources, reaching hundreds of millions of dollars yearly in lost economic opportunity and costs to reduce or repair their damaging impacts. And it's the last whereas, the Pennsylvania Invasive Species Council encourages all Pennsylvanians to learn and celebrate their native species. There are many actions that leaders, business owners, educators, community organizations, and residents can take to protect this essential part of life in Pennsylvania. Therefore, I, Tom Wolf, Governor of the Commonwealth, do hereby proclaim June 17th, 2022 as Native Species Day in Pennsylvania. I encourage all citizens to take actions to sustain Pennsylvanians' native species. So we'll take a round of applause. So our agency is happy to be an active part of the Invasive Species Council, and part of the reason we do that is self-serving because of the fisheries resources that we conserve. But the native plants and trees that grow along the waterways, when their leaves fall into the waterways, they really provide the nutrients for the base of the food chain. And I've heard the term junk food for fish. If something falls in the stream, whether it's an invasive mussel species or a non-native plant material that's not really digestible by the fish, it's like junk food. It just passes through you like a Twinkie. It doesn't give you any nutritional value. So we want to do everything we can to make sure that there's only native species dropping into the water and also being introduced there. It's also important to note the difference between invasive and non-native. The invasive ones are that really cause the trouble. They impact the spawning habitat of our wild fish populations. Talked about the impacts of the food chain. They can compete native species if the invasives take over in large numbers. So we're trying to do everything that we can to work with our partner agencies to make sure that you do have a healthy balance in the streams and that we're not having things like hydrilla, zebra mussels being transported around the Commonwealth. I'm really happy to report that even just today, actually, we have out for public comment proposed rulemaking from our Board of Commissioners that would finally get us up to the speed with other states in the Northeast and other states across the country with not moving invasive species on boat motors, not having bilges be the source of an invasive when you move your boat from one waterway to the next. So we're really trying to step up and do everything we can to do our part as an agency. But we're happy to host this project here. We'll talk about that at the end, but I guess my role was to read the proclamation, and now turn it over to Chris Abel, who is the coordinator of the Invasive Species Council.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you all for attending Pennsylvania's first Native Species Day, and thank you to all the partners who helped make this day and event possible. My name is Chris Abel, and I'm privileged to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and the Governor's Invasive Species Council. Native Species Day is an important opportunity to recognize and reflect on the importance of Pennsylvania's native species and how they are under threat. Native species play an essential role in our economy, environment, and health. All life is interlinked in an interdependent web of native species which have evolved to coexist in a delicate balance to maintain clean air and water, vibrant forests, productive agriculture, and the natural areas we all rely on for recreation and well-being. Invasive species disrupt this balance by outcompeting native species and decreasing biodiversity. Maintaining biodiversity is crucial for sustaining a healthy environment that is resilient to climate change. The invasive insect, hemlock woolly adelgid, weakens and often kills our state tree, the eastern hemlock, with many cascading negative effects that ripple through the environment. For example, with its dense foliage, eastern hemlock trees shade and cool rivers and streams to maintain water temperatures that our native brook trout and other aquatic life need to survive. Spotted lanternfly is the most recent invasive species to arrive in Pennsylvania, and the Department of Agriculture has worked hard to limit its spread. Ailanthus altissima, or tree of heaven, was introduced into Philadelphia in 1784 as an ornamental. As the preferred host of the spotted lanternfly, Tree of Heaven facilitates its growth and spread. This interaction highlights the need to prevent and manage invasive species as effectively as possible. Many other invasive plants also threaten our native species. Often, pollinators and other insects rely on just one or a few native plants. Birds, in turn, rely on those insects to rear their young. Invasive plants like Japanese barberry can impact our health by creating beneficial habitat for deer ticks and increasing the prevalence of Lyme disease. To help minimize impacts like these, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture enforces the Controlled Plant and Noxious Weed Law, which currently lists 46 species that are banned for sale or production. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture also chairs the Governor's Invasive Species Council. It was created through executive order to provide guidance and facilitate coordination for invasive species management. It consists of 7 state agencies and 14 organizations. Currently, the council is focused on creating a new statewide public-private partnership program to battle invasive species called Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management, or PRISM for short. In his budget, Governor Wolf proposed $3.5 million in funding to implement this new program. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and the Invasive Species Council support this PRISM program and look forward to implementing it to help protect Pennsylvania's vulnerable native species and the industries they support from invasive species. Once PRISM is up and running, we hope that everyone with an interest in protecting native species will participate in the program. I encourage everyone to visit agriculture.pa.gov/invasive species council to learn more about the PRISM program and how the Department of Agriculture and the Invasive Species Council work to protect Pennsylvania's native species. And with that, I'll turn things over to Department of Environmental Protection Secretary Patrick McDonough.
Chris. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chris. I'm Pat McDonough. I'm the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Here on this beautiful day in this beautiful spot here in Lower Paxton Township, the one thing I feel like I need to point out at the outset, Tim did a good job of giving credit to everybody but himself. So I feel it incumbent to do that. I can remember a few years ago now, he and I met, and he was like, man, we have this great property here right on, we're right in the middle of these townships that are dealing with stormwater issues. How can we do something about that to really lift up, support the townships, but also create this amazing habitat? So thanks, Tim, for your leadership to help get this project moving. And thanks, Chris, for keeping us all on the rails in terms of moving ahead on the Invasive Species Council. It's a lot of good work, important work that impacts, as you'll hear today, a number of different missions in all of the agencies, but all really focused in a similar direction in terms of making sure our environment, health are protected. As Chris said, we cannot take for granted the biodiversity that we have in terms of species here in Pennsylvania. It provides a number of benefits. It's food sources, as was said, timber, outdoor recreation experiences, as well as jobs and businesses that rely upon our native habitats. And many scientists believe that biodiversity is the key for core benefits people derive from their environment. So it's essential for our health, to the health of our water, land, and air, and therefore essential to our own health. Over many decades, as we've crisscrossed the world, we've brought more and more invasive species back into our own habitats here, and we're seeing the effects of that. Some of them proliferating with breathtaking speed. I can remember when we were dealing with West Nile when I first started with the agency, and how quickly that moved. We're seeing it now with spotted lanternfly, where that quarantine area has just expanded exponentially over the last couple of years. But we're working in very direct ways to try to make sure we're managing those non-native species. In Lake Erie, our biologists are partnering with the other Great Lakes states and the province of Ontario to control proliferation of non-native species like the zebra mussel that was mentioned, cagua mussel, and the sea lamprey. And that the sea lamprey in particular, it's a parasite that will attach itself to the side of its prey. And one sea lamprey will kill over 40 pounds of fish in its lifetime. So again, important to maintain control over that. We're also working with partners to test the use of electric barriers to help keep some of those invaders out of habitat for native brook trout in northwestern PA in that Lake Erie basin. In South Central PA, our Waterways and Wetlands program makes support for the American eel migration part of our permit requirements for the Muddy Run hydroelectric power plant on the Susquehanna. And to show you the connect of this, in 2014, we began requiring them to trap and transport American eels above the Conowingo Dam into other areas of the Susquehanna River Basin. And as a result of that, we're seeing an increase not just in the eel population, but in freshwater mussel population. And that is critical because those freshwater mussels will filter gallons of water every day. So the more mussels you have, the cleaner the water becomes in the Susquehanna River Basin. And finally, we're out on the Pymatuning Reservoir, helping to manually remove invasive European frogbit that smothers other aquatic invasive species, really choking off the life in that reservoir. Our waterway construction process now provides information about native plantings and making sure that we're taking care of the habitats as we are continuing to build and restore our wetlands. So we're providing millions of dollars of grants across the state and making sure that as part of those grants that we're making sure native species are what are being planted as we're doing our restoration work. And as you can tell here, you know, we have a really, really good partnership to make sure that we're carrying all of this forward. So thrilled to be here in part of this, both the story of and the inauguration of this first Native Species Day. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague from DCNR, Matt Kieffer. So, Matt.
All right, thank you, Secretary McDonough, and thank you, Tim, and all the partners. We're happy to be here today. Again, my name is Matt Kieffer. I'm Assistant State Forester in DCNR Bureau of Forestry. And our mission is basically to conserve our forests and our native wild plants. And as part of our mission, we manage our 2.2 million acres of state forest. We're responsible for wildfires. We monitor forest health conditions and conduct treatments to reduce the impact of invasive species. Like, for example, we just finished up our spray program for Lymantria, formerly known as gypsy moth, across the state, and Game Commission as well. And so when you drive across like Route 80 in places, parts of 322, and even up north toward the Allegheny National Forest, like right now, you'll see brown hillsides. And the hillsides aren't supposed to be brown in the summertime. We also provide technical assistance and education, and also some limited funding for private forest management conservation, including our native wild plants. And as you're familiar, and you've heard a little bit already, we're fortunate to have nearly 17 million acres of forest across the Commonwealth. And these forests provide us with significant values and benefits every day, including wood products. They help clean our water, clean air, wildlife habitat, and many, many recreation opportunities. And all these values, of course, contribute to our economy, our sense of place in the Commonwealth, and overall our quality of life. Unfortunately, along with these values, there are many threats to the forest, including the loss of forest to commercial and residential development, climate change impacts, insects and disease, and invasive plants. In the most recent inventory of our forests across the Commonwealth, the U.S. Forest Service found in 64% of their sampling locations the presence of invasive plants. And so that's all across the Commonwealth. Half of those sampling locations contained multiflora rose, which is the most abundant invasive plant. And as you've heard, these plants germinate, they grow very aggressively, outcompeting the native vegetation. And so when there's disturbances like a windstorm or a blowdown, even management activities like harvesting, if you don't take care of those invasives, they'll take over the forest. And that impacts regeneration of both trees and our native plants. Events like today and the project that you see here are so important for both on the ground benefits and helping to raise the awareness of our native plants. We have about 2,100 native plants in the Commonwealth, and they all thriving in all different kinds of habitats, ranging from the shorelines of Lake Erie to the high elevation wetlands in the Poconos, to even desert-like conditions in the Serpentine Barrens down along the Maryland border in southeastern Pennsylvania. Some of our native plants are extremely valuable and collected for their medicinal uses, such as American ginseng and golden seal. The Wild Resource Conservation Act gives DCNR the responsibility for the conservation, classification, and protection of our native wild plants, and we actively work to conserve these plant species and their communities across the Commonwealth by classifying them as rare, threatened, and endangered. We promote using native species in landscaping and restoration efforts like the work here today. We provide funding for native habitat improvement, both on public lands and private lands, working to address address invasive species like many of our organizations. And we have programs to manage the collection of American ginseng. So we're hoping all these efforts help people to begin to understand and notice the native plants in their environments and how they contribute to our ecosystem health, distinguish them from invasive plants, and eventually take action through restoration, management, and treating invasives. Programs like PRISM that we heard about and the Invasive Species Council, I think, are providing some good pathways for the future to make some real impact. So thank you. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Denise Johnson from Department of Health.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Matt. I'm Denise Johnson, Acting Secretary of Health and Physician General at the Department of Health, and I'm so glad to be here with my colleagues today to recognize this Native Species Day. I'm sure that it's already been said, and you know that we really are all interconnected, and you won't be surprised to know that health is really impacted by the biodiversity of our environment. You've heard already about the Japanese barberry thicket. Proliferation of that invasive species can cause a habitat for mice, which in turn harbor the tick that causes Lyme disease. We know that in areas that have more of the Japanese barberry thickets, that there is more prevalence of Lyme disease, and in areas where there's less Lyme disease. Pennsylvania is unfortunately a leader in Lyme disease, and so that we need to take all the efforts that we can to help to reduce this. So not only addressing the invasive species, but also making sure that when you're out, you are protecting yourself, that you're doing a tick check when you go back in. And if you have any symptoms at all of Lyme disease, make sure that you reach out to a healthcare provider as soon as possible, because early detection is key to get treatment to avoid other issues related to Lyme disease. But it's not only Lyme disease. There's so many other conditions that are affected by our environment and by invasive species. Things like the giant hogweed that can cause burns on the skin and allergic reactions. And we also know, and we've heard already, that the trees help to filter the environment, that having native trees is important for our air quality. It also provides cooling to people. And in areas where insects have decimated these trees, insects like the emerald ash borer or the Asian longhorn beetle, or as you heard, the hemlock woolly algidid. These really cause decreases in air quality, but it also can cause heat islands as well. The Department of Health is very proud to be a part of this council, addressing invasive species and preserving our native species. We are looking forward to participating in the PRISM program, and we know that our health is dependent on our natural environment. We know that we have tremendous mental health benefits by being outdoors, enjoying the biodiversity, and we want to preserve these activities for individuals. So thank you very much. I'd like to turn it over to PennDOT's Executive Deputy Secretary, Melissa Batula.
Thank you, Denise, and really I greatly appreciate being able to be here with all of our sister agencies on such an important event. And again, I'm Melissa Batula. I'm the Acting Executive Deputy Secretary here at PennDOT. And again, I'm very proud to mark the Commonwealth's first ever Native Series Day. So to put things in perspective, PennDOT owns about 150,000 acres of state-maintained roadside. So in support of native species and federal environment partners, we've identified areas for improvement in PennDOT's roadside seed mixes. So we've removed the crown vetch and replaced it with a more diverse native-focused plant community for seeding on slopes, which is a big change for us, but we're looking forward to the impact that's going to have for all the health benefits as well as, of course, the aquatic resources as well. So the change also includes the removal of the tall fescue from the wetland plant mix and the addition of pollinator-focused seed mixes. So our environmental staff is currently working to further refine revisions to our seed mixes, which will support increased native species like the blue stem, milkweed, and the beautiful black-eyed Susan. So additionally, we entered into a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant partnership with the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania to develop pollinator plots along PennDOT's right-of-ways. So coordination we began last year in 2021 to select the sites for doing the seeding. And as a result of that coordination, 2 sites in Allegheny County were selected and prepared to be drill seeded in the spring of this year, so 2022, with a pollinator plant mix. The seeding of these 2 sites was just concluded here in May of 2022, and with the management activities, of course, to follow. We've also developed PennDOT's pollinator habit plan with 4 goals in mind: plant, protect, partner, and promote. So the plan supports efforts to establish, maintain, and increase areas with seasonal native wildflowers and plants that help sustain the state's pollinator species, some of which are showcased on the poster there. And along with our plannings, PennDOT's taken the initiative to address invasive species within our right-of-ways. So we've been preparing guidance for our staff as well as our contractors who are working with the department to help them address invasive species throughout the life of a project. So from design through construction and finally on into ongoing maintenance. I'd like to add that this very site here, Veterans Park, is the location of the partnership that was discussed earlier between Lower Paxton Township, Susquehanna Township, and the Capital Region Water to remove sediment from our waterways. And we have released a second contract, which is going to include Swedera Township. So the additional partnership project will provide for more best management practices to be constructed throughout the entire Paxton Creek watershed. So as evidenced here today, the greatest opportunities for improvement really start with the collaboration and respect of all. So we're proud to be doing our part to advance this initiative, and I thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to the Pennsylvania Game Commissioner, the Director of Wildlife Habitat Management, David Gustafson. So thank you. David?
So I will, excuse me, I'm going to keep my comments really brief for 2 reasons. One, because they all covered it all already, and I don't think I have anything left of importance to really say. And number 2, so we can get to take a look at this project here and hear from the people that put it all together. My name again, Dave Gustafson. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Wildlife Habitat Management for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And we have not only the responsibility for managing the second largest single ownership of land in the state, the Pennsylvania State Game Land System, which is 1.5 million acres, but also, like DCNR, working with private landowners to educate and promote native habitat management practices. So Chris did a really good job talking about the interconnectivity of these invasive species and how they affect our systems. And the importance of native species when we're considering wildlife and habitat really can't be overstated. Whether we're looking at the financial strain that it puts on all of our agencies to manage these non-native invasives, or whether it's the strain on our ecosystem processes, those challenges are tremendous on both ends. And like Chris mentioned and others, our ecosystems are all interconnected. Everything that happens to one thing happens to something else, and sometimes they compound. And I thought it was interesting, I think back on my career, which started in the path of forest management, and I think back to what I was learning about in college at the time, gypsy moth, and a few other non-native invasive species that were ravaging and affecting our forests. And I look back on my career now and I think of things like emerald ash borer that came in and wiped out our ash resource, and what's replacing that ash in those systems. How are wildlife responding to that lack of seed source from ash, which is a highly valued seed source for things like ruffed grouse and wild turkeys. And when I look at things like our state tree, the eastern hemlock, and how the hemlock woolly adelgid, as it causes the death and decline of our state tree, it affects our state fish, the brook trout, by raising water temperatures in those critical headwater streams. It affects our state bird, the ruffed grouse, by removing that critical winter habitat that they need in those harshest times of the year. So whenever we're talking about invasive species, it's never just one thing that you have to look at and control. You have to control the connected environment all the way through. And I mean, right now, I just smashed a spotted lanternfly nymph, and they're crawling all over everything. And when you look at, people might think that's just a nuisance, and it only affects ailanthus trees, which are invasive anyway, and so that's okay. But when you look at what lanternflies can do to our vineyard industry, our stone fruit industries, how that may affect our wineries that are really important in Pennsylvania. So things like that, the interconnectivity of it all between people and the natural environment is something really important. So on behalf of Executive Director Brian Burhans, our Board of Commissioners, the rest of our partners in the Invasive Species Council, we really appreciate being here today as part of this group to see what the Fish Commission has taken the lead on here on this site, just as an example of what can be done through partnership and collaboration. And to close, I'll just say that our state's diverse wildlife resources depend on these native ecosystems. And these invasive non-native insects and plants disrupt these delicately balanced systems, and they create very difficult challenges to managing for healthy wildlife and healthy habitats for both wildlife and people. So through partnership, like the Pennsylvania Invasive Species Council, we can share knowledge and we can share resources to promote native species and ensure healthy wildlife and healthy habitats for both current and future generations of Pennsylvanians. So with that, I say thank you to all, and I'll turn it back over to Tim to get ready for a tour.
Yep, and I'm gonna go off script here. And if you see a spotted lanternfly, just smash it. Wanted to note a couple other organizations that are here. Pennsylvania Sea Grant, I see Kelly here. They are the leader in Pennsylvania when it comes to outreach on aquatic invasive species. So just thanks to Pennsylvania Sea Grant for all they do. Morel King and Warren Elliott from the Chesapeake Bay Commission, or I guess Pat's also for the Chesapeake Bay Commission, are here, and really want to acknowledge the work that they do. So thank you to them. We talked about the eels. I'll also make an offer here. If anybody would like to see some of those eels that Pat talked about, our fisheries biologists, I've been out with them a couple times, and you can literally be on a fisheries management boat doing night electrofishing work for smallmouth bass underneath the Turnpike Bridge, and they're everywhere. It'll just blow you away. So if anybody, I'd include a reporter of that, anybody here that wants to get out with our biologists and see what we do, we'd be happy to have you along. And then two last things. It is a beautiful day, and what better day to go boating. We tell people to check, drain, and dry. You don't want to move invasive species from one water body to another. So if you do get your boat out, Make sure you check it for any plant material, drain it, dry it out before you move on to the next body of water. And before turning it over to RES, this is totally off script, but Pat McDonough told us that this is his last public event. He's retiring as secretary. He's got other days, but he said this is his last press event. So if you could join me in a round of applause for Pat McDonough for a lot of great years. And with that, we'll turn it over to our friends from RES to tell you what you're looking at.
What's supposed to be from the podium?
Mike Sachs from Resources and Environmental Solutions in Philadelphia will tell us what is planted here and why it's important.
All right. It's great to see everybody out here. This is a wonderful event, and you can tell all the cooperation from all these different state agencies and state officials made it happen. And it's great to see that much interest in what we do every day at Resource Environmental Solutions, RES. As I was introduced, I'm Mike Sachs, the general manager of our Northeast region here. And we have, in my region, which is mostly Pennsylvania, we have over 100 employees doing ecological restoration work every day. And we are the nation's largest and most experienced ecological restoration and water resources company. Projects like this are very difficult and rely on a lot of cooperation from state, federal, local entities and ourselves. And in this case, I want to say thanks to the people that made this project possible. First and foremost, it's PennDOT, Capital Region Water, Susquehanna Township, and Lower Paxton Township. They did a great job collaborating even before we got involved to make this project and the many other projects in the area that are part of the same program possible. We have seen with PennDOT especially a commitment to water quality that we haven't seen for quite some time. We're really proud of what we're seeing in the state from PennDOT, and the pollinator habitat project that we got to be a part of was amazing recently on some of the state's highways. So the Fish and Boat Commission also deserves a really big thanks from us and from the community for making this land available for this restoration project. RES looked all over the county and really the Paxton Creek watershed to find the site that had the most restoration potential, and this was it. And this site was only made available to us thanks to the cooperation of the Fish and Boat Commission. There are a lot of competing land uses in the Commonwealth for managing our resources and doing everything that we want to do on our land. And ecological restoration, as you heard from everybody, is a really important thing that we need to do on our land, and it requires that type of commitment to water quality and ecological restoration that you saw here today from the Fish and Boat Commission. So like I said, this project is the Veterans Park Restoration Project, or the Veterans Park Pollutant Reduction Project, and it's part of a larger effort within the Paxton Creek watershed that was led by PennDOT and the municipalities that I named. And what we've done is we've restored the entire valley behind us. This valley was an incised stream. It was a degraded ecosystem top to bottom. There was a lot of sediment pollution coming from this valley and the streams in this valley before this restoration project. So first and foremost, that's why this project was constructed. It was constructed to reduce sediment pollution and the associated nutrient pollution that goes into Paxton Creek, Susquehanna River, ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. So the co-benefits of this project beyond pollutant reduction are some of the things that you heard all the different agencies talk about. And we'll focus on biodiversity and native plants. We, as far as tree and shrub species, we planted 800 stems of wetland tree and shrub species and 100 stems of upland tree and shrub species here today. And I'll name a few for those who are familiar. And we also controlled and removed a lot of invasive species, some of which you heard mentioned: multiflora rose, barberry, honeysuckle, autumn olive. Those are common ones that you might have found in this valley before we removed them. And a lot of them are still present around the area. And we planted things, I'll name a few, the list is pretty long. But in terms of tree and shrub species, you'll see today in this project: common buttonbush, silky dogwood, red osier dogwood, common winterberry, American sycamore, pin oak, and black willow, to name a few. Those are ones that we planted. There are also a lot of volunteer species that you'll see that were here and really just needed the proper kind of environment, the proper kind of ecosystem around them, which we created. In terms of other plant species, herbaceous plants, you'll see wetland pollinator habitat. Swamp milkweed, for example, was planted here. And you'll also see upland pollinator habitat such as common milkweed. And you'll also note the removal of some things that are invasive herbaceous species like reed canary grass that was common on sites that were in the Paxton Creek watershed. So what we see today is a very young site. It hasn't yet matured. We constructed it last year and it's doing great. And what you mostly will note is cover crop or nurse crop, things that are planted to create shade and cover and erosion control so that we can allow in the next few years all these great native species that I've mentioned to come up. You'll see some of them today, especially some of the volunteers that were already here. And you'll see over the years as we watch with the Fish and Boat Commission from their headquarters and all the people who go to this park, all those great native species and all the biodiversity that'll come in next year and for the following years. And Rez will be out here, the guys in the bright green shirts that do the great work for me, they'll be out here maintaining this site, making sure that the invasive species don't recolonize and don't take over. We'll be diligent to make sure that doesn't happen on all of our projects, especially this one, for several years. So it's great to see everybody out here, and it's great to see such an interest in what we do, and I'll enjoy watching the biodiversity come to this site over the next several years. Thanks, everyone.